Hello, welcome to the first of the Global Soreshi interviews. Um, Martin, let's start at the very beginning. Tell me who you are and a little bit about your project.
Okay. Which aspects to focus on?
Let's start with a little background first, so people have a sense of where you came from to get where you are now.
Background as in life, as in I was born in Poland and
Well,
moved to the States at 12,
sure.
at 10
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah, the background, yeah, as far as I remember, I thought about technology as a tool that can be used to benefit all of humankind, and that's why I pursued education, got up to a PhD in physics, but I was sadly disappointed in the type of stuff that I was learning, so at the end of the PhD, or actually towards the beginning of it, I started thinking that what I was doing was not really consistent with a better quality of life for all.
hmm
I was in fusion engineering, and at that time, when I was thinking about what kind of pattern in society could benefit all, I started to think about open source technology for sustainable living. I was convinced by the time I was in grad school that the only way we can make life better for everybody is through open sharing
hmm
of information that's relevant to our economic process, because otherwise we're always going to be in this competitive uh, dog eat dog kind of setting,
hmm hmm
forgetting that there's abundance out there and nature provides abundantly, and if we're wise we can live prosperously without conflicts on this planet Earth.
hmm So, I mean, let me unpack that a little. So, you were working, I mean, you did a PhD in fusion engineering and wound
Hmm.
up living on a farm in Kansas making machines that produce bricks. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
uh,
significant journey here, in terms of like a sort of personal transformation. There's actually a story there in terms of how you came to, put your values into practice. And I think that's actually something that's very interesting. The process of putting your values into practice is something that is sort of a profound part of all of this stuff that very few people focus on. So, I mean, how did you
hmm
get these values and how did you decide to actually dedicate your life to doing this?
okay. If there's any one significant event that would contribute to that, besides just my general nature of being curious and thinking about technology as a tool for doing
Mm-hmm.
good, there was a guy I met at the beginning of the grad school, an Indian guy who ran a class of lifestyle engineering where I learned yoga, meditation, breathing, Indian cooking, and so forth.
Wow, wow.
And at that point is when a huge transformation started to take place in me, because through meditating more, just getting insights into how things work, I basically disconnected. I was able to kind of discover my own mind, or discover what, or say accelerate the process of discovering what is really meaningful. And um, I think without it I would yeah, I must say that just simply accelerated my process of developing as a person. But the bottom line is that okay, you observe all the problems on a Earth, and you say, well, why aren't we solving these issues? The
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
resource conflicts, your wars, and what's the problem? Why is technology not making life truly better for
Mm-hmm.
everybody? Unprecedented prosperity, fewer work hours. That technology promise has never been delivered.
Right.
And anyone who's got a curious mind would ask, well, why? What's going on? And that's where I started thinking about my involvement with technology. And at some point, having absolutely no technical skill, I mean, I started out in chemistry in undergrad,
Mm-hmm.
never had any practical skills really in terms of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, I said, wow, I need to master my ability to manipulate physical objects, i.e., in terms of my own survival. Let's start there. Can I live it on my own? Can I use products that are totally sustainable? And since I found not many of them at my local Walmart shelves, I decided that I will make a lot of stuff for myself
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because of this moral imperative, if you may, to live absolutely sustainably, because simply it's possible,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
doable, and I was convinced that I have to do that because it just feels good for one, and I will not be contributing to global ills of all sorts if I can be self-sufficient. So that's where the self-reliance comes in, and I actually like to use the word self-reliance, which which talks more about your capacity instead of self-sufficiency, which kind of, I think that it maybe implies that you're alone or something. It's more about self-reliance.
And that's, I mean, that's a very interesting sort of process, right? I mean, this is something that we both share, that somewhere back in the day there was this period of meditation that really made us aware of the impacts of what we do in the world, and that then turns into this engineering thing. I mean, that to me is kind of the core of, well, I mean, the implementation step, right? The people who actually decide that they're going to do it seem to be in a very different state of consciousness from the people who say this just simply this ought to be done. You know, what I'm interested in here is actually the motivation that makes people pick up and say, okay, I am going to, you know, reorganize the whole basic framework of my life in order to, you know, live in accordance with, you know, my values. And to me, the technology is like the expression of that decision, but the decision itself seems to be really critical, and it's not something that there's much of a cultural dialogue about.
Yeah, it has to be definitely fueled by an intense desire for freedom, along the lines of give me liberty or give me death.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really.
And I mean this...
Because, one can say that, well, I can say that my desire to be free, to be autonomous, to be self-determinate is the highest value. It's like, why would I not want everybody on this planet to do what they need to do to make themselves happy, as long as they're not hurting others? It's that personal freedom and choice is what's most important, and that then led into the whole technological realm, if I may. Yeah.
So, I mean, the technological part is obviously, I mean, that's the core story here, right? I mean, you have a slab of technologies, you know, this across this, you know, very broad range. I want to just fill in some of the gaps for people who aren't familiar with your work. So right now, you're on 30 acres in Missouri, you know, growing a good percentage of your own food, living in buildings that you made yourself, devoting, you know, pretty much all of your time either to open source engineering on global problems, or maintaining your own life by, you know, growing the food and, you know, cooking the food and building the buildings and farming and all the rest of this. I mean, that's what you're doing. So, I mean, just take a second here. That's actually really fairly radical. You're probably one of, you know, at most 5 or 10 people in the world who are actually living that lifestyle in a way that produces hardware. So, you know, in that context, now tell us what you're working on the technology side.
Okay. When we get onto a piece of land, we are interested in being stewards. And part of that is having the equipment to do that. So as we got into a piece of land that was formerly a soybean field, just a monoculture, it was a blank slate, and we had to create a way of life on it.
Yes.
So we built some natural buildings out of earth bag construction, then we added another cordwood construction building. But one notices that if they're on land that you need to build, especially if you want to create a world-class research center for open product development. So the first technology that we are developing and we have a working prototype of is the compressed earth block press, which is a high-performance device that produces 3 to 5 bricks per minute. And with it, you can build both natural buildings and buildings that can, because they can be made rapidly, they can build cities and build new civilizations. So with that, we can build our whole facility, we can build our living quarters, our barns, experimental facilities, and so forth. So that's, out of practice, we chose the compressed earth block press for our own needs.
So this is a bootstrap process, right? You got onto the land, the first thing you did was you made some buildings by hand, right? Which is this earth bag process where you take these, is it polyethylene or polypropylene sacks, and you fill them with mud, and you know, you build them in a ring which forms a wall. And we'll try and put a picture in here of the house so we can actually show people in the video. So then on top of,
we'll do that.
And then the next thing that you did was you started making a machine to produce more buildings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So,
That's correct. And then, now this story gets much more radical than that.
well, sure.
So let me
But
begin.
you know, this
Okay, well-
the core of this piece, right? I mean, what I'm really trying to fill in for people who are not familiar with your work is the actual practical tangibility of you bought a patch of land, you built a house by hand, and now you're building a machine to make more houses. And all of this stuff is being
Uh-huh.
published as you do it, which is, I mean, just astonishing. It's extremely remarkable.
Yes, and that's a beginning, and I mean that because the next, if you look at a farm, a piece of land, you need a tractor
Yep.
for all kinds of agricultural operations. Plus, we actually use a tractor to generate power for our welder through a power take-off generator, and so forth. Now, we didn't have luck with tractors here. Our one tractor broke. Make the long story short, it broke. It's expensive to keep up. It was costing us $2,000 a year.
Wow.
So the next thing in line was, hey, I don't trust the tractor I have now to continue to take me through the building phase with the compressed earth block press.
Yes.
Now the compressed earth block press runs off the tractor hydraulic fluid, so it's tractor driven
Yes.
by hydraulic fluid.
Yep.
And I said, boy, the way these tractors are, they're complicated. They cost a lot to get fixed. I mean, you have to send them to the shop and so forth. So we said, okay, we got to build our own tractor because I want to be absolutely sure that the building program is going to continue this year without interruption.
Right. And for that,
So
you
right
needed
now-
reliable tools. I mean, you know,
Yep.
this has already happened for software, right? People built the tool chain
Uh-huh.
where you needed the compiler to compile the operating system to compile the program that you wanted to run.
Yeah.
And you, I mean,
No,
what
that's
you're
a good-
doing here is
that's a
you're
good metaphor.
implementing a tool chain in the physical world using this same open technology,
Absolutely.
which is, I mean,
So-
incredible, really.
Mhm,
Quite
mhm.
radical. So, sorry, I didn't mean to
just
interrupt. Back to the tractor.
No, yeah. Well, the tractor, it's going to be I've got the frame built, I've got the engine and just about all the parts sourced, but it's unique in its design, just like the compressed earth block press, because it's designed for lifetime of service.
Mm-hmm.
The tractor itself, also like the compressed earth block press, is bolt-together assembly. So using big 4x4 by quarter-inch steel tubing bolted together with 3/4-inch bolts
Yep.
is the main frame, such that at the end of the day, if anything breaks, I can take it apart in a matter of minutes. Now, for the tractor, let me just tell you, it takes 4 hours just to take to split the tractor apart, so you can get at things that are wrong. Typically,
Yes.
you know, if it's anything inside the tractor, 4 hours, and that's and the whole job is like 8 hours, so forth. Here it's minutes instead of hours to do maintenance activities. Now, so the design for disassembly is one feature, but the great versatility is what we're building into this tractor as well. So one, it's a device to power the compressed earth block press, and in fact it's got enough power to run 4 of those in tandem, and we are planning to build 2 for the building season this year.
Yes.
2 of these compressed earth block presses, but it can run up to 4 of them to have essentially 1,000 brick per hour machine. Now
And
that's serious production.
How many bricks does it take to make a building?
I can tell you one. Okay, the figures are, you can build about I did some calculations on it. I think it was about 8 by 8 feet of 2-foot wall thickness, so that means 2 bricks thick.
Yes.
That you can do. I forget the exact. I should get back to this, but okay. If you talk about the kind of structure, okay, let me do a comparison because I did think about this for the initial earth bag house that we did.
Yes.
It took us about 3 or so weeks to put the walls up, to get the structure up. With a compressed earth block press, the one off, the 3 to 5 brick per minute,
Yes.
it would take you 1 day to get about 5 or 6 feet high, and then another half a day to finish.
So when
it.
you're
So
talking
it's-
about 1,000 bricks an hour, 1,000 bricks a day, what you're beginning to talk about is needing
1,000 bricks per hour.
It was an
let's be
hour.
clear
So what
about
you're
that.
beginning to talk
Yeah.
about is producing enough bricks that it would take 20 or 30 people to lay the bricks that the machine is producing?
It would take 4 people for the 1,000 brick per hour.
Mm-hmm.
That is still about. No, you're right. Actually, if it's 3 to 5 bricks per minute
Mm-hmm.
for a single machine,
Yes.
therefore about 12 to 20 for the quadruple machine.
Yes.
Well, for the single machine, one person can, if they're working really hard, they can, and the machine is set up right next to the wall, you can basically lay them as fast as you're producing.
Okay. Okay.
So,
So if you move really, really quickly,
but
you can keep up with the machine.
yeah, yeah. So essentially, it's a high productivity, no joke method of building,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that needs to be emphasized. And we've had experience with the natural building, and I'm telling you, I cannot build a new civilization on that unless I had a lot of ample time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And a lot of labor.
No, I mean,
So
Earthbag
that's
is
just the basic
just
story.
really, really, really slow. I mean, you're talking about moving
Yeah.
whatever it is, 4 or 5 tons of dirt by hand. Whereas, I mean,
Mhm.
this approach with the
Mhm.
compressed earth block, I mean, what are they? They're like maybe a foot by 2 feet in size, maybe 6 inches thick. I mean, they're
Yeah,
big bricks.
They're 4x6. Well, these bricks for the compressed earth block press,
Mhm.
yeah, they're 4x6 by 12 inches.
Yes.
So they're manageable in size. It's not fatiguing work.
Mm-hmm.
Like an earth bag might weigh, say, 50 pounds.
Yeah.
This thing weighs maybe about 10 pounds or so.
Okay, and you mix
Yeah.
in some concrete to stabilize them, or
No, actually no.
so they're
You
just
can,
they just come
if you-
straight. They're compressed mud brick.
compressed earth, not mud. The moisture is very low, about 5%.
Ah,
So it's
okay.
very dry soil,
Yes.
and it compacts. That's how they are bound together,
Mhm.
and then you can stack them right away.
Okay.
Now you can add stabilizer if you like concrete or fly ash
Mhm.
if you want additional resistance to moisture.
Yes.
Now what we would plan on is if you use the raw bricks just out of clay. Clay is about 30%, and the rest is sand and silt. So
Mhm.
just kind of a subsoil that you take from our site. That you would have to stabilize on the outside by stuccoing or something,
Yes.
or having a big overhang of a roof
Mhm.
to protect it from moisture.
So, okay, you have the brick machine. You're working on the tractor. Tell me about the food part of your situation.
Yeah, let me finish up the tractor a
Oh,
little bit because
yeah,
actually there
please.
are some details that are more important.
Mhm.
This tractor will be super versatile, so that story does not end there because the agriculture part is connected to it.
Yes.
So we're going to be building a rototiller for that tractor that can do both the mixing of soil for the compressed earth block press
Mhm.
and also preparing soil beds for agriculture.
Yes.
That's one item. That's also going to have an auger, a cement mixer,
Mhm.
a well drilling rig.
Mhm.
How about that?
So
It will power the power takeoff generator for generating electricity to run welders and industrial power.
So fundamentally-
at the order of
I mean, when you say tractor,
Yeah.
what you're talking about here is a motor on a frame with wheels that you can then divert power to run all of these other operations. It's like your sort of mobile farm tool power plant.
absolutely plus a front end loader and backhoe. How about all your construction
Wow,
activities?
wow.
If we got a trench for the foundations and move this excavate soil for a foundation, the front end loader is going to be it.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
just to
So-
mention a detail,
Mhm, mhm.
you can't do that with a regular tractor with a regular transmission because you can't just shift back and forth in gears
Right.
because you'll wear out the transmission.
Right.
This is hydrostatic, meaning hydraulic driven.
Yes.
The motors are hydraulic, so you simply press a lever back and forth. You go back and forth at will
Mhm.
readily. So it's really a combination of what they call a skid loader and an agricultural tractor,
Yes. So
where
I mean,
actually
what's
okay,
coming from
I can
this,
go
right?
into
Well,
details.
no. I mean, the detail is important, but the big picture, this
Yeah.
is one of the things that isn't apparent until you get into the detail. What you're talking about is
Yeah.
re-architecting farm tools, right?
Yep.
Because I mean, there's this whole
Basically-
history of the tractor. Like the early cars were horseless carriages, and in the
Uh-huh.
same way, the early tractors were basically mechanical horses. And what you're talking about
Okay.
is actually looking back at this whole business of tractors and farm implements and saying, okay, how would a smart guy do this starting from nothing, right? I mean, that seems to be
Absolutely.
what you're saying. It's
Yep.
this radical redesign of farm tools to get this sort of factor 10 jump in efficiency.
Yep.
Well, which is kind of,
That's right.
I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I mean one thing to notice it's the really unique feature about it is that this is a total Lego set-like construction, life-size erector set construction.
Because you're
Get a
using
load
this
of
is
this.
these big square steel tubes that you're bolting together to make the frame, and then
Yes,
you're
but let
attaching the
me
tractor itself too.
yes,
Or the
but let me tell you about the modularity of the implements themselves. For example, the same motor that drives the rototiller can be attached in a different configuration to run a post hole digger or a cement mixer. So you're sharing the power units themselves by simply reattaching them through quick attachment onto different devices. So you're reusing such that an incredibly small set of hardware items creates a wide diversity of function. Now, so just to continue along those lines, the hydraulic motor that runs the power takeoff, the spinning shaft on a tractor,
Yes.
that's totally detachable, such that I can attach that to the sawmill. I forgot to mention the sawmill. We're making
okay.
a sawmill that will also run from the same tractor.
So basically, what you have is a set
so-
of motors that you're using for all of these different purposes. So the same motor
Yeah,
that
there's
runs the
basically-
sawmill runs the post hole digger, runs the tractor itself, and then these things become like just sort of mechanical attachments.
Yeah. There's 3 different motors. One of them includes a winch, for example, too.
Yep.
But there's 3 motors that serve a multitude of functions. For example, between the rototiller to a well drilling rig, the same motor.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Makes perfect. I mean, it makes
Okay,
perfect
so that's-
sense. But it's interesting that we haven't had this. I mean, this is part of the thing about commercial pressure, right? Part of the reason that we don't
Exactly.
have systems like this already is that if you're in the business of selling tractors and well rigging rigs, it doesn't necessarily pay you to come up with one system that does both.
Absolutely.
And I mean, this is interesting to me in that open source tools tend to have a different approach to commercially produced tools. You know, they tend to be more flexible, they tend to be more configurable, they tend to be higher maintenance. But at the same time, the maintenance tends to be easier, and there's this kind of blurred line between maintenance and configuration for the purpose you actually need the tool for. You know, this kind of flexibility.
Well,
at the
maintenance.
edge.
One word has to be made about maintenance. The maintenance is okay if you have a lifetime device.
Yes.
The question is basically, for example, are you gonna spend $10,000 to $20,000 on an equivalent well rig, or are you gonna spend 1 hour to reconfigure the device to a well rig?
Right.
You tell me the choice.
Exactly.
I'll take
Exactly.
I'll take the latter.
So the cost cap, I mean, for all of these tools, the tractor, I mean, what does a tractor cost? $60,000 or $80,000 retail? Is that about right? If you buy a new tractor?
Yeah, it depends what size. It totally vary. But I calculated all the functions. I added that up for all the features that I do have, and a similar device or a set of devices would cost about $180,000 to $100,000.
Wow.
Now my cost for parts for that entire setup is $8,000.
Wow. So you're talking about a factor 20 saving here over doing this individually. Plus
Factor 10, yep.
factor 10, well, I mean, plus you factor in all of the additional time and labor that it takes to make it, but you still wind up with this enormous efficiency jump. And the factor, it's about similar for the compressed earth block press. I think you told me at one point it's a factor 5 or factor 10.
Yep. It's for the compressed earth block press, the 1,000 brick per hour models cost $200,000 in the competition.
Okay.
We can make them for between 10 and 20,000.
Wow.
That's after we count our labor.
Wow. So, I mean, let me just sort of factor this down. You start with bare land, you build a house by hand, you build a machine to make bricks to make more houses, then you build a machine which replaces all of your basic farm implements for 5 or 10% of the cost and has this incredible flexibility. So what comes next? I know we've talked about 3 things, right? First of all, there's publishing the designs for all of this stuff under open licenses so that other people can also have this kind of breakthrough in price and performance. So that's the element of spreading the technology. Then there's all the stuff you talked about in terms of the different technologies that you're building after this. And then finally there's the sort of social and political impact of doing this.
No.
I mean, that's kind of a huge picture. Do you want to talk more about the technology, or do you want to talk more about how you're licensing it and the business model, or do you
Yeah,
want to...
let's talk. Let's wrap up the technology because there's two more items that we need to consider that are extremely important. That is energy generation, fuel generation, and flexible fabrication, which means a highly flexible workshop attained at a fraction of the cost again that performs just about you can make just about anything, including computer numerical control, which can be added today with open source software.
Yep.
So it's not a far cry to get that thing totally computer controlled
So this
fabrication.
kind of connects to the multi-machine project and the Fab Lab project.
Yeah.
Right? Which, just for people who don't know this stuff, the multi-machine is, let me see if I can get this right. It's basically a way of making a machine, like a mechanical mill for producing metal parts, from essentially recycling an engine block. Is that about
Essentially,
right?
it's a mill drilled. Yeah, it's about right. It's based on the accuracy of an engine block,
Okay.
and combined with a very accurate rotor spindle, you turn that into a metal milling machine, lathing machine, drilling, or lathe mill drill.
Okay, so it's
Plus
another one of
with
these
the-
things where you take a single big motor and you attach a whole variety of different tools to it to get this sort of breakthrough in price and performance. It's kind of similar. It's like
And
the
you know what's
machine
cool?
tool
I
equivalent
can-
of the tractor.
Yep, and get a load of this. Our tractor, with one of its hydraulic motors, can be the power source for this. So this is, I just thought about that. That kind of struck me today. I should be powering that thing up with a tractor, and that's who'd ever think that?
So you're talking about one motor or two or three motors that power all of your machine tools and your tractors, and potentially further down the line your vehicles and goodness knows what else. So you've got one.
Yeah, goodness knows
In
what else.
in the sort of mythical limit, you'd have one big motor in your life, and that one big motor would do everything from your blender to your washing machine to your post hole digging.
In fact, you mentioned a good one. A washing machine powered by one of those motors would be desirable.
Oh, I'm just seeing a washing machine hanging off the end of your tractor right now. This 50-gallon drum that spins at like 6,000 RPM to dry your clothes.
Well, we're gonna have a cement mixer. Maybe we could use it for a clothes washer. Yeah.
The problem with this is that it sounds entirely rational. But at the same time, it's so different from the way that people already do things. If I go through and I count the number of the number of motors that you see on a typical farm, it's dozens or hundreds. Inside of a typical house, it's dozens it's dozens. And what you're talking about doing is, factoring out all of this redundancy, so you've got one motor and a bunch of adapters, and it powers everything.
Yeah.
It makes
That's
perfect
correct.
sense. It's just not something that, as a sort of capital-driven market, is necessarily going to evolve.
Right.
All of these. Do you know about this thing, Cosis Penguin?
I don't.
It's a guy called Benkler who wrote a book that's about. He wrote a book called The Wealth of Networks, but there's a bunch of stuff there about how a company, like where the boundaries between different companies form. And it's all this theory about capital management and inefficiency of decision making and all the rest of this stuff. But it also, I think, explains where the boundaries between products form. Like, why is it that you've got this boundary which suggests that each product is kind of a self-contained whole? Well, the answer is it's so that you can sell them as modules. And so you wind up with all of this redundancy that's produced by the mechanisms of the market rather than the actual technical problem. Does that make sense?
That makes absolute sense.
And so, what I'm sort of seeing here is that, in a sense, what you're doing is optimizing out.
It's an experiment. Yeah, ours is an absolute experiment in cracking through all those boundaries, and we're finding that it works.
Yeah, the whole systems integration producing the breakthrough performance. In this case, I feel like what you're doing is optimizing out the redundancy that's introduced by the way that the market produces these things in the normal sense.
That's correct.
Which is, you're doing some kind of interesting stuff over there, man.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up the technology bit with
please.
fuel and energy.
Yeah.
I believe that with abundant energy, you can run an entire economy on a small scale. So up to industrial processes like aluminum smelting from clay, I believe that on a very small parcel, if you can harness solar energy by a proven device like solar concentrators, solar concentrator electric power,
Mm-hmm.
at proven efficiencies, you're getting 1 megawatt per acre.
Yes.
Now, that's nothing to laugh at. The solar energy is abundant.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I laugh at all the energy scares and crises that we talk about because they're a figment of the imagination, in my view, and we've just got to show that.
Yeah, I mean, they're a crisis
we
of
were gonna-
conversion, not a crisis of availability.
Yeah, yep. So we're deploying a solar concentrator electric system that will run we're looking, if we get 1 kilowatt of useful power out of this for our first prototype, we'll be happy. And as far as fuel production, we have access to a design of a good gasifier, and from a personal gasifier, if you may, that costs $300 to make.
Yes.
And from that, if you're generating the carbon monoxide and hydrogen as the outputs, the next step is liquefying that into fuels.
Okay.
So we're talking about production of diesel fuel from any biomass.
So you're talking
That's,
about a syngas synthesis, right? Where you take all your wood and you break it down into, as you said, carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas by heating it. And then further down the line, you've got some system of catalysts that will break that back down into syn fuel that you can feed into your
Yep.
cars and your diesel engines and all the rest of this stuff.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's proven technology. Now
Yep,
our question is, how low can we go? How decentralized can we go on this? How small can we go and still be efficient? And by the way, the other note on efficiency is, of course, people ask, well, what's the optimal scale of doing something? You might think, oh, a huge scale plant is proven. Yeah, it works today. But if you look at biomimicry or nature, you see that things exist on a small scale. There's an apple tree. It takes 10 by 10 or 20 by 20 feet. It's not a monstrosity that will be miles big and wide.
Yeah.
Nature likes to do things individually small, and I think that's a totally accurate model for what we want to do. And in fact, according to our conversation yesterday, we were discussing a little bit what's the appropriate scale. I think that you can be absolutely naturally efficient at the personal scale as well. So that's one thing we're trying to show here, but we're quite convinced that it can be the case, and we aim to break through all kinds of myths regarding this topic, because if you consider the integrated picture, the ecological scenario that includes nature and human factors, then the small scale does make sense. I mean, we've had Gandhi, Schumacher with Small is Beautiful, some seminal work on a topic, and we're here to show that, learn from that, and show it in practice. Learn ourselves. Does that really work? Does that hold water? So it's an exciting time with these projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how far up the technology chain you want to go. I mean, when you're talking about, like your solar concentrator system, right? This is solar thermal, so you're reflecting the heat
Correct.
onto some kind of generator. I think we discussed Tesla turbines or a Stirling cycle. I mean, so you're talking about making the stuff that you use for energy capture, using the machine tools that you're also using to make the tractors and so on.
Absolutely.
And the loop on this
fact,
closes, right? I mean, the idea is that you can make a multi-machine using another multi-machine, right?
So we're talking, yes, exactly. So we're talking about self-replicating items both on the agricultural front, where plants and animals are naturally self-replicating. We're also taking that to the technological realm.
So, the long-term vision here, right, is inside one of these farms, you can actually make everything that you need to make another one of these farms.
Absolutely,
And
and
this
that's
is the long-term
that's actually
picture.
the phases. Yes, it is. Down the road, that's exactly what we want to do, to basically show that you can self-replicate an entire operation like this at minimal cost, introducing an option which you have coined of buying out at the bottom. Unprecedented prosperity, and it doesn't take you till retirement to do it.
So, I mean, let me just think through the practical implications of this. You have one of these places, and let's say that by the time you're fully operational, it's 10 or 20 people who are operating it. two or three people per acre working together to farm and to run all of the infrastructure, to make the power, to make the fuel, to do all the rest of this stuff. So
Yeah.
over time, in the excess with the excess labor that people have, you can go and you can fabricate the core that you need to start another farm. They can go and they can make an additional tractor. They can go and they can make all the additional implements. They can go and make the additional power collectors. You take cuttings of everything. You buy some land down the road. You move down there, and you begin the whole cycle again. I mean, what you're
Yep,
talking about
that's-
is this sort of very slow, sort of 4 or 5 year cycle of these little farms kind of podding off, and gradually building a genuinely sustainable alternative economy.
That's well said.
That's
Yeah.
pretty revolutionary. I mean, that's a big deal, right? I mean, that's as radical as the idea that you can, produce an entire technological ecosystem that doesn't connect to the sort of the
Yeah.
mainstream systems.
The comment on that is the limits you run into then are the material feedstocks. And I claim that from aluminosilicates or clay, you can be producing either compressed earth blocks, or you can be refining that to aluminum, a high-tech feedstock
Yep.
for the entire mechanical infrastructure,
Yep.
or silicon for your semiconductor industry, as well as renewable energy, solar cells.
And I mean, certainly on the extraction side, right? Aluminum is basically just a matter of having enough power to throw at it. And if you're talking about a
That's the
megawatt an acre, that's plenty of power.
Exactly. That's why I need to emphasize the importance of generating electricity, which just makes a whole bunch of processes possible.
Sure.
So you
sure.
have ample electricity, you can get all these precious resources out of dirt. That's what we're trying to show.
So, I mean, in the limit here, you're talking about being able to have essentially a self-sustaining system right down to raw material extraction.
Absolutely.
I know one of the things you
We
mentioned
claim
is
that-
bioplastics, which is a whole other, department of
Yeah.
stuff, but it gives you, I mean, the ability to do pretty much everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we claim that could be done on a scale as small as a parcel of land, perhaps our 40 acres. But the political implications are great. If you can do that on a 40-acre scale, forget about resource conflicts or any other ills that plague us today.
Right, and what you're saying is any place where you've got sunlight and you've got ample access to to clay, right? I mean, you're talking about sun, dirt, and water as the things that you can run a high-tech economy from.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's significant.
That's not a bad proposition. It's extremely inspiring, and what else is to be said about that?
Well, it's also kind of like a miniaturization, right? I mean, in a sense, the current industrial economy that we have really runs that way. The problem is the problem of scale. Everything that we have in the world comes from, dirt and water. It's just that the people doing the extraction are thousands of miles away in a different political unit.
Yeah, and the feature of the present economic system that makes it appear that that's the only feasible way to do it is the fact that the modern economy takes the easiest route. It's whatever is so-called most economical.
But,
So
I mean,
you're gonna take the bauxite. Take the aluminum example. You're gonna take the bauxite, aluminum oxide, instead of the aluminosilicates, where the bauxite is a strategic resource and the aluminosilicates are everywhere on Earth.
Right. Well, I mean, a lot of this is also historical accident, right? I mean, it's only really 200 years since the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of times we're just doing things in ways which are linearly descended from the initial breakthrough. So what we're often working with isn't best; it was the descendant of what was easiest to discover.
Yep.
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 I mean, I see this a lot. I mean, this is everywhere in software, and it's everywhere in some kinds of economics. That you have some initial pattern that people picked, and then you're working with the descendants of that pattern, even though everybody knows this is not the best way to do things, and then the switching cost is too large. So I mean, it seems like you're talking about going back to these fundamentals and getting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point to notice is that if people had this basic technological literacy, they would not put up with the modern nonsense of technology that we have today. I mean, the options would be much more ecological and sound and filled with less problems of securing all those needs. Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that you see on a small scale too. The fact that, all these VCRs sit there blinking 12 is not a minor thing, The fact that people can't operate the tools that they have because the interfaces are so bad is a really profound failure of the whole process that's producing these artifacts. And I mean, if that's how it is for user interface, imagine how it is for manufacturing.
Yeah, which leads to a different system, essentially based on a repository of open source design and flexible fabrication facilities to put that design into practice. So you download a design on your computer, and if you have a computer controlled setup of machines, you can produce just about anything in your garage. So the implications are huge and positive.
And I mean, let's talk about the scale of this. I mean, by the time you start talking about manufacturing tractors and solar energy generation and all the rest of that stuff, you're talking about a few tens of thousands of dollars of hardware to do all of this, right? The lathes and the mills and so on. So in a sort of wealthy environment, that might be one per household, and in a poor environment, that might be one per small village. 50 to 150 or 200 people sharing, $30,000 worth of capital infrastructure, which comes out to be, $100 a head, for the ability to manufacture this entire system.
Yeah, just to give you what I thought about the predictions are for the cost of a robust kind of a flexible fabrication capacity, it would be about $5,000 to $10,000 with the metalworking, computer-controlled torch cutting tables, circuit fabrication, metal casting, and possibly laser, because laser tubes are pretty cheap, and you can actually make an open source laser pretty inexpensively as well. So
this is for laser
this entire
cutting
package,
of components.
Yeah, laser cutting of metals of any substance. I mean, laser cutting of, for example, discs for the boundary layer turbine or other components. So $5,000 to $10,000 is what I predict in an open source version. That's for materials, and you might add some more for it, depending whether you have someone else do it or you do it yourself.
Sure.
But so yes, $10,000 order of $10,000 for the cost, and yes, in a Western world, that's less than a new car.
It really is.
And in a developing world, one per village is good. And the point being is that this is people kind of ask us, well, they think the stuff that we do on a farm is irrelevant to them, but we're just about generating the tools that can be used anywhere, whether it's on a farm, you can have a workshop in a city or a whole village, wherever. So I think what we're doing is quite applicable to a lot of settings.
So let's talk a bit about the business model. I mean, you're talking about $5,000 or $10,000 worth of gear that you can then use to build essentially a sort of a self-reliant civilization at a farm level.
Yes, just about any electromechanical device.
Okay.
You can say for short. So up to electronics, up to tractors, renewable energy systems, so forth.
Yeah, which covers. I mean, that's basically all of the essential infrastructure, right? I mean, what Western civilization did until about 1950 was electromechanical devices, and then on top of that, we've added computers, which are chip fabrication is clearly a different ball game, at least for the moment, at least until we get generic FPGAs. So, I mean, how is this going to be done? Not everybody is going to sit down and design these systems for themselves. You've mentioned a little bit about, industrial manufacturing and this kind of post-industrial manufacturing. How is this going to spread? I mean, do you see farms that specialize in producing tractors and then sell the kits or sell the entire tractor? Or do you see this as being more a kind of organic spread? How does it look in the long run?
What I see is a repository of open source design, which anyone can use if they have the equipment to do so. Now that requires two things. It requires high skill and a little bit of capital to do that.
Okay.
What our role in that is going to be is after we develop all the tools, we can teach people here in a real immersion program
Okay.
how to do that very effectively. And in fact, the education component of this whole adventure has to start. I would like to see this as a viable learning option in technical schools or universities or wherever.
So like an apprenticeship program where people actually come to the farm and learn how to do these. I mean, learn how to do these processes. You learn how to build
That's
them.
one
and you
route
learn
to-
how to design them.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, we go a little more ambitious and we call out for a K through PhD immersion Renaissance freedom lovers program.
This sounds like
that
generation
we-
2 or generation 3. You know, the kids who
Yeah,
grow
that's-
up with machine tools in their basement, and you know.
Well, what you have to notice is that our public education today, basically, you and me, what does it do to us? It basically deprives us of any kind of skill with which you can live sustainably. I mean, that's systematically taken out of you, so that therefore you become totally dependent on a system. And now people think that what I'm doing is totally out of whack, totally radical. But it's not. It's very fundamental.
this is-
It doesn't require more than high school math and physics, as far as I know.
Well, although
And,
I'm sure you're putting that PhD in plasma to work somewhere
Well,
in there. But
Yeah, but I'm a pioneer in this. Once this is developed, you don't have to know that.
yeah, no, that's
Just
an
like
excellent
computers. Yeah, just like computers, you don't have to know how to build a chip to put together a
point.
computer.
That's right. That's right.
There's modules that little black boxes that work.
I mean, two things strike me about that. I mean, the first is the education part. What we're talking about is a sort of scientific version of the old self-reliant farmer lifestyle. You know, instead of raising your own horses and having each generation of horses raise the next generation, what you're talking about is building your own tractors and extracting your own metals and building your own power capture. And that self-sufficient farmer lifestyle was a huge part. I mean, that was the building block of all the previous civilizations right up until the Industrial Revolution. And I mean, it seems to me that what we're talking about is this historical trend where we might see this enormous centralization of industry as being like a historical accident. That we did that at the very beginning of high technology and science. But in fact, what we're going to do is move rapidly back towards this old model where people are largely self-reliant. Does that sound about right?
That's if you take yes, the answer is if you take a book. I recommend a book called The Second Industrial Divide, and that discusses exactly what you just said. It's that the concept of centralized production has just been a political and a course of action that was a choice, and the other one that was mentioned in the book is flexible fabrication. It's both are possible. It's that history, as you said before, turns out in a certain way by the interests that run the history.
Yep.
So it's not about the non-feasibility of a small-scale and decentralized production. It's just that no one's done it, and this is where we are.
Well, I mean, individuals can get things started, right? Richard Stallman, nailed this idea of free software, and this idea of the commons and all of this other stuff that came out of that initial insight has had this huge cultural impact over about 30 years. And similarly, I mean, the stuff that you're doing looks like the seeds of an ecosystem which takes this idea of free and applies it to all of the other things that you need to live, not just your computers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
And that's
the
a
long-term vision.
gigantic step.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool. Are there other things we should talk about? I mean, do you have other stuff on the top of your head?
I think we covered a lot of things.
Yeah, I think so too. I have one question for you. What should people be reading? Who should people be reading? You mentioned the Second Industrial Divide. What are the other things which are important resources for people who want to understand how to learn to think this way?
Small is Beautiful, and then Buckminster Fuller. Read him. He's a technological optimist, but he didn't have the open source concept down. I can't really think of anything else. The Second Industrial Divide is for me, it's been I consider it the seminal work on flexible fabrication, yet I have not heard anyone else mention that book. Really, it's from MIT. I wonder if actually the Fab Labs came out of that.
Interesting.
Those concepts.
Yeah, who wrote this?
I don't know.
Who wrote the second?
Michael J. Piore.
Michael J.
Piore. Maybe he's at MIT still.
I was going to say, is he still around? We should talk to him because it sounds like
I don't know. He must be. It's a book from I think the 80s.
Wow.
So
wow. Well,
maybe he is.
Maybe that's our next mission. We'll go off and see if we can talk to him.
And of course Gandhi as the seminal figure for Swadeshi, for self-reliance by. Yeah, I mean you can't forget that, but that's on a philosophical side, and but also a very practical side of producing your own economic self-sufficiency as a way to ward off the invading colonials.
Sure.
That story is totally applicable today.
Absolutely. I mean, all over the world, we've got countries that are in all kinds of trouble because the companies that came in to do resource extraction have also become political powers. And this term banana republic actually came from like the banana companies coming in and toppling governments. I only just discovered this. The Gandhi part, the Gandhi part is very interesting. I feel like we're sort of going into the second era of Gandhi. He actually designed the spinning wheel. The spinning wheel that he's always pictured with. It kind of has this interesting history that somebody designed it in a competition, and then Gandhi took it and made some modifications that made it much more efficient. So he actually did just a little bit of engineering, and it was a sort of shared context.
Perhaps you can tell us and me, tell the audience and myself as well, what was the economic impact of him spinning or the salt march? I mean, can you give a tangible example of how people producing for themselves were able to succeed?
Oh, it was a huge deal. The Salt March didn't have an enormous economic effect because what he was campaigning against for the Salt March was taxation. So the big deal in the Salt March was that people were making salt and not paying taxes on it. But the place where the real economic impact was the cloth trade. Because England had gone through the Industrial Revolution and had these huge factories to produce cloth. And part of the issue was that they'd produced all of the cloth that the British could possibly use, and so they needed to have an export market, which was India. So as the Indians began to... it was two things. First of all, you got the capability to produce khadi, this homespun cloth. So people began to produce it, and then because Gandhi was such an important leader, it became... an important part of fashion to only wear khadi. It became a political statement and it became a fashion. And so the sale of British cloth in India fell and fell and fell and fell and fell to the point where it was beginning to make factories in Britain close. And then Gandhi visited the factories and said, look, I'm really sorry about the economic impact that we're having. I'm sorry that you lost your jobs, but we're just trying to survive and live on, stand on our own 2 feet.
Yeah,
and it was
that's a powerful.
It made it over a period of time. They made it less and less economic for the British to occupy India.
Yeah.
And
so there's an example of your own self-sufficiency, economic, warding off political control.
People all over the world are looking for some way to freedom, and the model of kind of centralized democracy plus hypercapitalism looks a little shaky. It's not clear that centralized democracy and hypercapitalism makes people free in the long run. And I feel like the Gandhi approach, because he died early, we didn't see it form its full context. If Gandhi had lived to be 70 or 80, who's to know where this sort of Swadeshi approach would have gone? And I think that, the challenge for us now is to say, okay, look, hypercapitalism really is not producing the political results that we want. America is getting less and less free, and the concentration of wealth is fundamentally anti-freedom in a really deep way. What's the path not taken? Like you said, there was this branch between centralized control on one hand and decentralization on the other. In manufacturing. There's also this branch, back in American history between the Hamiltonian and the Jeffersonian democracy. And I feel like in a lot of ways what we're talking about here is the technological foundations of Jeffersonian democracy. What does it take to have these self-supporting, self-reliant gentleman farmers? And the answer is it takes extracting aluminum from clay and building your own tractors. So, go Jefferson, go Gandhi. It's quite a combination.